August 1945. Japan is ash. Not damaged. Ash. Millions are hungry. The money is fake. The factories are silent. And the country that tried to conquer Asia can't even feed itself. But here's the part that makes no sense. Within one generation, Japan becomes the world's most feared economic machine. So what changed? Because it wasn't culture. It wasn't luck. It was the rules. Japan didn't just lose the war. It lost the story it told itself about why it existed. The emperor's voice on the radio, Han, a voice most Japanese had never heard, announced surrender. And in that moment, the entire system that ran Japan for decades just stopped. The generals, the code, the divine mission, all of it became fiction overnight. The world expected Japan to stay broken, a shattered economy, a humiliated people, maybe a permanent occupation, maybe it splits like Germany, maybe it fades into history. But 30 years later, Japan is making the world's best cars. Its trains run on time to the second. Its electronics are in American homes. It hosts the Olympics. It becomes the second largest economy on Earth. So what actually happened? Because this wasn't magic, and it wasn't hard work. Every defeated nation works hard. Most stay poor. Japan rebuilt because defeat killed the old system so completely that nobody could defend it anymore. But first, understand what total collapse really meant. Yes, the cities were gone. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya burned flat. Hiroshima and Nagasaki turned into wastelands. Rails twisted, ports wrecked. But buildings can be rebuilt. The deeper collapse was economic. Japan's factories were designed for war, not consumers. Food production fell as men were drafted. The government printed money to fund battles. By 1945, inflation erased savings. Currency itself stopped working. Returning soldiers found no jobs, no food, no purpose. Black markets replaced real markets. Disease spread through ruins. Orphans slept in train stations, but the collapse that mattered most was invisible. The story, Divine Emperor, Sacred War, Destiny to Rule Asia, died on the radio. And when a nation's story dies, the rules die with it. The question wasn't, how do we rebuild roads? It was, what country are we now? Japan didn't get to answer that alone, because the Americans were already landing. September 1945, General Douglas MacArthur steps off a plane in Tokyo. He's now the most powerful man in Japan. But this isn't a story about MacArthur. It's a story about incentives. Japan is occupied, not negotiating, receiving orders. The empire builder is now run by a foreign general. But the Americans face a problem. If Japan stays broken, it becomes unstable. Hunger leads to riots. Chaos breeds extremism. Communism fills vacuums. But if they rebuild Japan the old way, they risk recreating the same militarized state. So they try something different. They rebuild Japan by rewriting it. Not just leadership. The rules. The operating system. First move. Remove the engine of war. The Imperial Army and Navy are erased. Not reformed, dismantled. Officers purged. War criminals tried. The institution that ran the country disappears. But removing the military removes the structure holding everything together. Government, industry, education, all were entangled with it. Therefore, the Americans rebuild institutions fast. And they do it with a document. Japan adopts a constitution it didn't write. Drafted in English, translated, imposed under occupation. The emperor becomes a symbol. Not divine, not commanding. Power shifts to an elected parliament. Citizens gain rights. Women vote for the first time. Then comes one line that changes everything. Article 9. Japan forever renounces war. No army, no navy, no air force. It looks like punishment. But that single line accidentally created Japan's greatest weapon. Because if you don't spend on battleships, you can spend on factories. If you don't train soldiers, you train engineers. But there's a catch. If Japan can't defend itself, someone else has to. And that someone is the United States. Therefore, Japan's power cannot come from force. It has to come from performance. But none of this matters if the country starves. In 1947, Japan is still collapsing. Inflation is killing trust. Money doesn't work. And without trust in currency, economies don't function. So the Americans bring in Joseph Dodge. His job is brutal. Stabilize the yen, even if it hurts. Spending is cut. Budgets are balanced. Money printing stops. Businesses fail. Workers are laid off. People are furious. But the pain creates something rare. Predictability. Savers trust money again. Investors can plan. Stability returns. By 1949, Japan has a functioning state. But it's still poor. Still occupied. Still dependent. Then a war Japan didn't fight saves its economy. June 1950. Korea explodes. The US mobilizes, and suddenly Japan's location matters more than its past. Factories reopen, orders flood in, trucks, uniforms, food, repairs. Idle plants come alive. Workers are rehired. The Korean War jumpstarts Japan. But this could have been temporary. Therefore, Japan has to turn a boom into a system. Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida makes the deal. America handles security. Japan focuses on growth. US bases stay. Defense is outsourced. Military spending stays low. But growth doesn't organize itself. So Japan builds something almost no one else dares to try. MITI, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, doesn't own companies. It steers them. It picks industries. Steel, ships, electronics, cars. It channels cheap loans, protects infant industries, forces competition, but only for exports. The logic is unforgiving. Japan has no resources. It must import, transform, and export, sell globally or stay poor. Therefore, competence becomes survival. Schools emphasize math and engineering. Factories adopt continuous improvement. Workers suggest changes. Quality becomes obsession. By the 1970s, Made in Japan flips from joke to benchmark. But people don't sacrifice for slogans. They sacrifice because the system pays. Stable jobs. Rise in wages. A future. Japan becomes something new. Not an empire. A production machine. The transition almost breaks in 1960. Massive protests. Fear of US entanglement. Rage over bases. But breaking with America means rearmament. And rearmament breaks the deal. Therefore, Japan absorbs the shock and doubles down on growth. 4 years later, Tokyo hosts the Olympics. Bullet trains run faster than anything on Earth. And they're never late. Sony, Toyota, Honda, Panasonic. The world fills with Japanese products. By the 1980s, Japan is the second largest economy alive. So why did this work? Because defeat erased the old rules. Because the new rules rewarded competence. Because security removed fear. Because markets were forced outward. Because failure was punished and improvement rewarded. Japan didn't rebuild because it wanted to. It rebuilt because survival demanded competence. Japan rebuilt because the rules made competence the only way to survive. And once a nation is forced to become competent, it never goes back.